Eddie Canestracci here. Hey, what's up? Drinking a Shiner Oktoberfest here. Damn tasty beverage. I love it. Just like I love October, it's my favorite month of the year. Yeah, there you go. And not just because of Halloween. That's part of it. That's one of the reasons, because Halloween is my favorite holiday. But it's also my birthday. My birthday's in October. So between my birthday, Halloween, and it's really when fall starts kicking in. I know technically September, I think, is fall. I don't know. I don't know exactly what day is the first day of fall. I think it's somewhere in September. But September's still hot out, especially if you're in Florida or California, which is usually where I'm at. I'm in one of those states. It's hot. October, though, is when the weather starts getting cool. Starts bringing some of that autumn breeze. I love that. I love it. It's my favorite time of the year all around. Autumn, fall, Halloween, my birthday. How could October not be my favorite month? And a great way to kick off my first October video is to finally discuss in detail every goddamn album from this legendary band, Overkill. That's right, this band right here, Overkill, from New Jersey. Overkill is my favorite thrash band. There you go. Along with October, we got another favorite here. My favorite thrash band. I love them more than any of the bands in the Big Four. And I love all the bands in the Big Four. I love all the bands in the Big Eight. We might all have our different opinions about who makes the Big Thrash Eight, but to me it's the Big Four plus Overkill, Exodus, Testament, and Death Angel. I think that's a solid Big Eight. I love all those bands. I love 80s thrash. But the thing about Overkill is, they're not just 80s thrash. They're still a current kick-ass band. And they never really stopped being a kick-ass band. They're very consistent. They have a lot of albums. A lot of albums. This is why it took me a while to get to this video. Because I was like, oh, there's just so many Overkill albums. And I wanted to do them justice. Plus, even though they're my favorite thrash band, I have not lived with them quite as long as some other Overkill fans might have. I talked about this. I do have one Overkill video, which you should check out. I'll leave a link down below, as Mick Watkins, my rock and roll brother, likes to say. Also a fan of October and the color green, just like Overkill. Yeah, fucking green. Slime, evil, toxic green. I love it. Perfect for Halloween. In the video, I discuss a little bit about how I got into Overkill with White Devil Armory. Yeah, that was one of their more recent albums. And that's where I launched into Overkill. And I got a lot of their more recent albums, which I was loving. And maybe I still love them. You'll find out when we eventually get there. But that's when I start to go back and get all those albums I should have got back in the day. And now I own every Overkill album. So yeah, I own every album and every live album. And they only got 3 official live albums, but I got them. And I'm going to discuss them too. We're doing every goddamn album. Alright, I'm counting the cover album, I'm counting the Fuck You album, which is 2 EPs combined, and I'm counting the live albums. And, of course, their proper studio albums. I'm gonna review it all. I was into thrash when I was in junior high in the late 80s. I loved Metallica, Megadeth, and Testament, and I discussed that in my videos for all those bands. And, you know, I love thrash. I was a thrash fan. But Overkill, there was something I recall seeing Hello from the Gutter on Headbangers Ball, and maybe that, and also Elimination, I recall seeing, and just Bobby's voice. Bobby Blitz's voice, just, I couldn't get into it. The vocals were too shrieking, too high pitch. It was just too metal. It's too metal for me. I couldn't get into it. It took years of me acquiring a taste for metal that I could eventually listen to those kind of vocals. The funny thing is, now, Bobby Blitz is one of my all-time favorite metal singers, and I love him, and he's one of the things I love most about the band, although they're just a great band. Primarily, Overkill it's Bobby Blitz Ellsworth, and Dee Dee Verney. Dee Dee Verney, who I assume is an Italian-American from his name and the way he looks, and he's from Jersey. So, Dee Dee and Bobby, that's Overkill. They're the creative core of the band. They're the only 2 members that have always been in Overkill, and they write all the songs. So there you go. It's their band. It's Bobby and Dee Dee's band. And it's a real credit to these 2 guys that they've had so many different lineups. So many talented drummers and guitarists have been in and out of Overkill over the decades. And yet, they're amazingly consistent. And that's saying something, that the bassist and the singer keep changing guitarists along with drummers, and somehow Overkill's albums are always consistent. They don't have like any St. Anger's or The World Needs a Hero, or, I mean, you know, just pick your bad album, whatever you consider the worst album from one of your favorite thrash bands. Overkill's worst album is considerably better. That's the thing. Overkill, in my opinion, have never released a bad album. They're just like Motorhead that way. A lot of people refer to them as the Motorhead of thrash. And obviously, Motorhead, this band right here representing Motorhead. Motorhead was a huge influence on Overkill. Obviously, they named their band after a Motorhead song and album. They formed in 1980 in New Jersey. They're Jersey boys. There were a handful of bands that were influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal and mixing it with punk rock and some other traditional heavy metal influences like Sabbath, of course, Sabbath and Judas Priest. And it created a new genre, and that new genre was thrash metal. And Overkill, they had the Power in Black demo, which in '83 was going around and circulating, and a lot of those Bay Area bands, from what I read, were listening to that demo. So even at an underground demo stage, Overkill was an influence in those early days of thrash that other bands were listening to. Although by that point, Metallica were already in the studio recording Kill 'Em All. So I do feel like Metallica was leading the charge, with Slayer, Overkill, Exodus, and Anthrax kind of close behind. And in 1984, they had their first EP, self-titled Overkill EP, which I talked about in my top 20 favorite EPs video. And that was just something they produced on their own and circulated amongst the underground. They finally had their first album in 1985, which we're going to get to in 1 minute. But before we dive into this every goddamn album review, I want to just say this about the guitarist of Overkill. My favorite guitarist for Overkill is Bobby Gustafsson. I don't know if you pronounce his name that way. A lot of ethnic last names in Overkill. And I got one myself, Canastracci. So I don't want to butcher these names, but I'm probably going to. But yeah, Bobby, another Bobby in the band. Bobby Gustafsson, if that's how you say his name. Bobby Gustafsson. He was their main guitarist, their only guitarist. He did lead and rhythm throughout their 80s albums. All their 80s albums, it's Bobby playing. And he's my favorite Overkill guitarist. So there you go. Bobby's my favorite. Unfortunately, there's a rift between these guys, and it still lasts to this day. I don't know the whole story. No one knows the story except for these guys, what went down. Obviously, some shit went down between them. And all I can say is Bobby Gustafsson is definitely my favorite guitarist from Overkill. The fact that they had to replace him with two guitarists and continued to have to replace him with two guitarists, that the only Overkill albums that really sounded full and complete had two guitarists, unless they were using Bobby G. That says something for Bobby G. It took two guitarists to replace him. So he's an amazing guitarist, and I think the best guitarist that was ever in Overkill. But to Bobby Blitz, Bobby B, and Dee Dee's credit, they were able to keep the Overkill train going, even without Bobby G. Maybe my favorite, or maybe now my second favorite Overkill album, was an album that didn't have him on it. And I love a lot of albums that he's not on. So that's no disrespect to him. That's no disrespect to Bobby G. I do think his guitar work was the strongest in Overkill. And even a lot of the guitarists that came in afterwards, I think to varying degrees, were kind of mirroring the kind of guitar work he did. He's an amazing guitarist, and it'd be great if he rejoined the band one day. Even though I love what the current lineup is doing. I think the current lineup is great. But yeah, so there you go. Bobby G is my favorite guitarist. And favorite drummer? I'll tell you when we get there. It might not be the original, but they're all great. Overkill's like Spinal Tap when it comes to drummers and guitarists. They have a lot, but it's always Dee Dee and Bobby. It's always Bobby Blitz and Dee Dee, these two guys working together, and they're great. Dee Dee Verney, he's my favorite thrash bassist, and I'm a big bass guy. People know I love the bass. I used to play bass. And Dee Dee, he's an amazing bassist, and it's no surprise that musically, he's the leader of the band, kind of like Steve Harrison, Iron Maiden. You could hear, I mean, not only is the bass prominent, especially on WFO, but even on just their normal albums, because WFO, well, we'll talk about when we get there, but even on their average Overkill album, you hear the bass a little bit higher in the mix than you do in a lot of other thrash albums. To me, it's always an indication, unless you're Nikki Sixx, most people that are the main songwriter, normally you hear their instrument a little higher than you would hear otherwise. So yeah, you could tell that, yeah, the bassist and the singer, they're up high in the mix. So yeah, it makes sense that they're the leaders of the band. And Dee Dee's bass lines are very distinct. They add a character to the band, this groovy kind of almost punk rock quality to the band. That is one of the things that I think distinguishes them. They definitely got this punk rock vibe in this groove, and a lot of attitude in Dee Dee's bass playing. Also his backing vocals, a little similar to Scott Ian. He has these very strong punk rock gang vocals in the background that do a lot of give and take with Bobby Blitz. And it's one of the characters to Overkill. It's not surprising. Anthrax and Overkill, both Northeast, Anthrax, New York, Overkill's Jersey. So I think that's the thing that made them a little different from the West Coast bands, is that they had this Northeast punk rock hardcore influence mixed in with the thrash. And that was evident on their first album. So now we're going to get into it. Preamble time is done. Now it's time to review every goddamn Overkill album. And punching you in the face with Overkill albums. That's what it's going to feel like by the time we're done. Because it's a lot of goddamn albums. 1985, released in October. And it's a total October album. Just look at that album cover. Fucking big bonfire. This is some real Sam Hain, Celtic fucking pagan shit going on. Feel the fire. I know my rock and roll brother, Eric Jordan RMCP, my co-host for the Rock All Over You podcast, this is his favorite Overkill album. Feel the Fire is not my favorite Overkill album. But if it's your favorite Overkill album, you're not wrong, because this album's awesome. I love this album. And in fact, I would say it's my fourth favorite Overkill album. And that's saying a lot, because if you're breaking the top 10 on my favorite Overkill albums, especially if you're breaking my top 5 like this album, that means it has to be an utterly awesome album, because almost all their albums are great. This is top shelf thrash. I love this, and I could totally get why some people think it's their best album. I just love 3 albums even more. That's all. But I love this album. I think it's a thrash masterpiece. There is something about 80s thrash debuts. Every major thrash band, I love their first album. Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer, Death Angel, Megadeth, Exodus. I love all their debuts. There's just something, you know what I'm talking about. Metal fans and thrash fans know exactly what I'm talking about. There's just something about thrash debuts. Thrash debuts just had this raw energy. They just had this raw energy and this just off-the-cuff vibe. They're almost always different by the second album. Overkill, maybe not so much so. But a lot of these bands, by the second album, they're kind of a different beast. But on the first album, there's just something really raw and nasty and underground about it. And I just love it. It's a perfect mixture of new wave of British heavy metal influence and punk rock influence. And every debut from every major thrash band had that quality to it. And this is another one. It's another one. Testament's first album is also a lot like that as well. And I love that album. And this is awesome. I mean, from the first track, you got Raise the Dead. Man, this is like definitely one of their heaviest albums. It doesn't let go. It's all thrash. The whole fucking album is just thrash metal. Raise the Dead kicks ass. It's an awesome opening. Rotten to the Core, which was an earlier version, was on the EP. That demonic laugh that Bobby does in the beginning. Ooh, it's even creepier, the laugh on the EP. But this laugh is still pretty creepy too. And just so catchy, and their gang vocals. And Overkill showed with this album that they have a quality too that you could tell they really learned from Motorhead and Lemmy's songwriting, where they're able to be very heavy but catchy at the same time. Not a lot of bands can do that. A lot of bands can be both heavy and melodic and have hooks and vocal hooks at the same time. And Overkill is great, and they've always been great at this. They're still great at doing this to this very day. And right here, like Rotten to the Core, such a catchy song. My favorite track is actually probably the third one, There's No Tomorrow. God damn, that riff, that badass riff. God, Bobby G, woo, man, his guitar playing is fucking hot. Listen to that. I love that riff, and oh, what a badass song. Second Son, God, so heavy, so catchy. That's another badass song. Then I guess maybe this is my second favorite song on the album, an Overkill classic, Hammerhead. Fucking hell. Greatest song ever with Hammerhead as the title. And just like a hammerhead shark in Tampa, we got a lot of hammerhead sharks here. Just like a hammerhead shark, this song fucking kicks ass. A fucking hammerhead fucking smashing you. I love when Bobby screams towards the end, "You're a fucking hammerhead." How badass is that? It's just so heavy, so catchy. It's a classic. The title track, Feel the Fire. On this song and a lot of the songs, I hear a lot of Maiden, a lot of early Maiden influence. It's not a surprise, that band. as I mentioned, had a bassist that was the main songwriter, Steve Harris. So no doubt, Steve Harris was a big influence on Dee Dee Verney. It's amazing. At this point, I will say all the tracks they say are just written by Overkill. So obviously the core was probably Dee Dee and Bobby Blitz, but I think Bobby G was definitely contributing to a lot of the songwriting in the 80s as well. He's amazing. Everyone's amazing. Everyone's bringing their A game. Rat Skates, who was the drummer for the first two albums, he's great. The whole band's great. Blood and Iron, great song. Kill at Command, so heavy. Maybe the heaviest song on the album. Man, it's fucking brutal. Overkill, the title track. Love it. Nothing to do with Motorhead's Overkill, although they would cover that later on. And we'll get to that when we get to the cover album. But this is the beginning of, I think it's a quinology. It's a quinology when it's four things. There's five. What do you call it when it's like five things? Overkill, awesome song, epic song, classic song, even though it's only 3 minutes and 27 seconds, but it feels epic, and that's because that's top-notch songwriting. That riff, it's great. Always reminded me of John Carpenter's Halloween theme, the guitar line, and I think that was the inspiration, and I'll talk more about that when we get to Overkill 2 on the next album, which to me confirms that this song was inspired by John Carpenter's Halloween theme. It's great. Another reason why Overkill is a great Halloween band. And then later copies, the copy I have has a fucking great cover of the Dead Boys' Sonic Reducer. The Dead Boys were a great punk band. Sonic Reducer was always their best song. I love that song. And Overkill do an awesome cover of it. When Overkill did a cover, they always made it their own. They were great at covering bands, similar to Metallica, who were also great at covering bands. Sonic Reducer, I love it. I love this whole album. The only thing I'll say, and it's not a negative thing because I think he sounds great on it, but it's interesting. I don't think Bobby Blitz on the first two albums was totally, his personality as a singer totally emerged. He sounds a little influenced by Bruce Dickinson, actually. In my opinion, he sounds a little Bruce Dickinson-esque, a little kind of power metal influence I hear anyway. He doesn't have quite his, what I'd say, his like Jersey Devil bite and snarl that became a trademark to his vocals. I don't really feel he has it here quite. I don't think it's actually until the third album where you really hear Bobby Blitz sounding like Bobby Blitz. Still great vocals regardless, and it's great. And goddamn, I only had like 100 albums left to review. And then we're getting to their second album. And I love this album, Taking Over, from 1987. I think it's even better than Feel the Fire. And that's saying a lot because Feel the Fire, I feel is awesome. But Taking Over, I think is even more awesome. And I think they defined themselves even more, bringing in more of that Jersey scrappy quality. I'm not saying that the first album was generic, but all I can say is I think Taking Over is a little more distinct and has a little bit more of the Overkill characteristic that you'll hear throughout most of their albums. And the songs, oh goddamn it. I would say this is my third favorite Overkill album, but it's a very strong third. In fact, I don't know. I could see that changing maybe a year from now. Like right now, I think I still got to go with my top two being my top two, but this is a really strong third. I think this is an amazing album. If it's your favorite Overkill album, you're not wrong. Time for another beer. Going with just the basic Miller Lite now. And what were we talking about? Yeah, that's right. Taking Over! My third favorite Overkill album and their second album. And I think it took what they started with Feel the Fire and took it to another level. The songwriting is even stronger. These songs are even catchier and it's even heavier in spots. It's amazing. Deny the Cross. This is really heavy, really catchy at the same time. Awesome opener. And it's just, badass sounding. Deny the Cross. Oh, man. That's like some Slayer shit. It's awesome. And Bobby's vocals during the chorus, when he's doing that scream, that's like some proto-black metal shit. He's just really, those screams are really, really, really over the top and really impressive. And I love it. I love this. I love this whole song. But then the second song's even better. Maybe my favorite Overkill song. I know, I kind of bounce between this and another song. Overkill has so many goddamn great songs, it's hard to tell. But you know what? I'm going to go with this. Right now, I'm saying Wrecking Crew is my favorite Overkill song. Man, that guitar riff, and that's the thing, Bobby G, man. And that's the only thing I'll say. I love all the guitar work and all the Overkill albums after he left the band, but I still don't think he's been top. This is like amazing guitar work. I love the guitar hook in the beginning, and that's the thing. I think Bobby G might be I would say after Dave Mustaine, he's my second favorite thrash guitarist. He's amazing. He's an amazing guitarist. Love Wrecking Crew. Love the vibe. You know, they bring in, this is the thing, it's thrash, but they bring in like the gang vocals, and they bring in this attitude that's not just punk rock, but also very AC/DC-ish. I definitely hear some AC/DC influence in Overkill, as well as Motorhead and a lot of other great metal and punk bands. And Wrecking Crew has that vibe. Just has that vibe. Bunch of blokes coming down and taking over. They're taking over. God damn it, just like those blokes on the album cover. And I love that album cover. I just love that you just see these guys. It's purple and green. This is one thing, I'm going to go off a little bit about this. The modern thrash album covers are all very serious, or they're somewhat generic. It's like the band's logo or just something kind of grim on the cover. You know what I love about 80s thrash? What I love about 80s thrash and heavy metal album covers is there was a lot more diversity. And there wasn't like this idea of what an album cover was. Like now they're almost like, there's just something kind of like more reined in and less gonzo about them. Where in the 80s, you had album covers like this. Or think about those like great Anthrax album covers, like what they were like in the 80s versus what they would become later on, you know, where everything just got so serious. There was this authentic, fun quality to the album covers then. And especially even when we get into Under the Influence, the next album cover, it's like, you know, comic book, and it's just fun. And Megadeth album covers were like that. And it just, everything's just very serious now and kind of grim and very slick. And I miss these kind of album covers. I love it. I love the Taking Over album cover. It's just a great, fun album cover, and it adds a humanity. You know, it's not like now a lot of these metal album covers are very faceless, and they just don't have a lot of personality to them. And even though the newer Overkill album covers are cool, they're cool looking, I just don't think they had the same character as the album covers did in the 80s. I think that was something that happened in the 90s where everything post-grunge, everything had to be just more serious, and you just couldn't have a scrappy, fun album cover like this. Fear's Name, great song. Use Your Head. I don't know, this might be, I don't know, we'll see. Right? I'm saying it's my third favorite Overkill album, but god damn it, I look at these songs. This has a lot of my favorite Overkill songs. Use Your Head, man, love it. And that's really bringing in that scrappy Jersey edge right there. And that's when we start hearing Bobby kind of becoming Bobby Blitz a little more, you know, and kind of shaking off some of that Iron Maiden and power metal influence a little bit that you heard on the first album. They're kind of, again, it's kind of scrappier, and I love it. I love Use Your Head. Fatal If Swallowed, an early version of this was on their first EP. Great song. Power Surge, another one of my favorite songs on this album. Real thrashy and heavy. Again, has an AC/DC influence, you know, with the title, but like heavier and thrashier kind of version of an AC/DC song. Love Power Surge. Electro Violence. God damn it. I love this song too. God damn it. I love it. This is in a lot of ways, this is kind of like the Let There Be Rock of Overkill. Like, it's just that album where it just has a lot of classics, and you can kind of tell that for a few years they probably built their live shows around a lot of these songs. Love Electro Violence. So heavy. So awesome. What a great band. This is one of the greatest thrash albums ever recorded. Yeah, and there's two albums I like even better. Maybe a little bit better. I don't know. I love this. Maybe this is my favorite Overkill album. I don't know. It's almost like a three-way fight. This is so awesome. And then you got Overkill 2, in parentheses, The Nightmare Continues. And this confirms my theory that John Carpenter's Halloween theme inspired the riff on the first Overkill song. Because Halloween fans, true Halloween fans, will know that on the VHS box of Halloween 2, the tagline was, "The nightmare isn't over." You got that? Halloween 2 on VHS copies, the tagline was "The nightmare isn't over," with that badass skull and the pumpkin. Love it. Love it. Iconic. Awesome. Horror movie posters in the 80s are just like metal album covers from the 80s. There's just something awesome and scrappy and just more artistic about them that you don't see in horror movie posters either as much. It's almost like everything is not as cool as it was back then. Look at that fucking VHS copy of Halloween 2. Just badass. But anyway, I digress. The nightmare isn't over. You see that? And this is The Nightmare Continues. You see what's going on there? Yeah, obviously not too much of a stretch to imagine that Bobby and the boys liked watching John Carpenter movies. So there you go. So this is the Halloween 2 of the Overkill songs. So it takes place in a hospital and it's a high body count and it's awesome. But whereas I like Halloween 2 better than Halloween 1, I'm going to leave a link down below since it's October to my Halloween 2 essay where I explain myself and explain why it's my favorite Halloween movie. That being said, I have to say I do think Overkill, the first Overkill song, is better than Overkill 2. I do think it's better. But Overkill 2 is still pretty awesome. Still a pretty awesome song. I love Overkill 2, The Nightmare Continues. I like the whole idea of them ending with Overkill songs, and I wish they would still do that. Maybe by this point, they would have reboots and, as long as they avoid Busta Rhymes. All right, no Overkill song with Busta Rhymes just because they're trying to be like a Halloween sequel. Don't do that. Don't do that, Overkill. And I don't think they would. But anyway, taking over. Awesome album. Awesome thrash album. Awesome 80s thrash for super studs. So if you're a super stud, you might like it too. Then after this, they released another EP. They released a Fuck You EP, which was a live EP essentially, but they did have one cover version of this punk song by the Subhumans called Fuck You. That's a pretty straightforward song title, isn't it? And it's a very straightforward cover with the middle finger. I love it. I love the attitude. And it's cool, and it's a great little live EP. It has songs from the last album I was talking about, plus Hammerhead as well. And so it's Fuck You, Electro Violence, Use Your Head, Hammerhead, Rotten to the Core. Great fucking live EP. And a few years later, they took this and the first EP, the first Overkill EP, and they made an album out of the two EPs, and they called it Fuck You and Then Some. That's how I got these two EPs. Of course, you know what I did. I separated it. They also added 2 extra live bonus tracks. One was the live version of Evil Never Dies, which is from the Years of Decay, and a cover, a really cool cover of Black Sabbath's Hole in the Sky. And I left that, of course, just with the live EP. If you got all their 80s stuff and you got their best 90s stuff and you got the last 5 albums, then by all means, get the Fuck You and Then Some compilation and separate the 2 EPs, and you got 2 awesome EPs for the price of 1 CD. It's a fucking Jersey dollar store bargain. Now we're getting to the third album from 1988. It's such a 1988 metal album. Under the Influence. Love that album cover. My favorite Overkill album cover. That's right. Look at that fucking Charlie. That's how I think you say his name. Charlie, right? I think that's how you pronounce it. And I think you got to pronounce it like in a Jersey way. Charlie. Charlie's gonna get you. Charlie's gonna fuck you up. Oh, just wait until Charlie gets here. When Charlie gets here, he's gonna fry your ass with his fucking eye lasers, fucking skull, a fucking demon skull, because he's got little like devil horns, but they're like bones. This is my theory on who Charlie is. Charlie, he was like a lower demon, like a lower from the gutter kind of Jersey demon, Jersey devil. And then he got decapitated or something. Some guy fighting a demon, he gets decapitated. But then, because evil never dies, he comes back. The nightmare continues. And he's a fucking skull now. He's a fucking demon skull. And bat wings came out of his fucking head. And he's got green toxic lasers that shoot out of his eyes. And if they hit you, you get majorly fucked up if not killed. And that's awesome. That's a recipe for one of the greatest metal mascots of all time. That's right. I think Charlie is probably, I'll give it to Maiden. I gotta say this. I know I give Maiden some shit sometimes, but yeah, Eddie's the greatest metal mascot. But I think Charlie's a close second. Yeah, he's pretty badass, man. He's pretty badass. Just check that guy out. And Under the Influence, I think, is the album cover that makes the best use out of Charlie. Look at that. And this fucking kid, he's like down in the sewers with a green shirt. I like the color coordination. I know Mick Watkins would appreciate that. A lot of color coordination going on with Overkill. Green is the official color of Overkill. But anyway, so this guy, this poor fucking guy, he comes down in the sewer just thinking like, yeah, I'm just fucking around the sewer. That's what I do. You know, he's just some deadbeat kid. Goes down in the sewer. And then, oh fuck, Charlie's down here. There's some kind of gate keeping it. So like, even if this kid like tried, he couldn't get out, the gate is actually the only thing kind of buffering him. So if the kid was smart, he just stuck right back into the hole. And he's probably going to survive actually. But I don't know the full capacity of Charlie's powers. I don't know if he can teleport or whatever. All I know is that if you get too close to those fucking laser beams, your fucking ass is grass, man. Anyway, so awesome album cover. This is the only Overkill album where I've heard some fans, some people, some metalheads say it's not that good. It's a little like Anthrax's State of Euphoria, which if you listen to my Rock All Over You podcast review of that, I gushed all over that album. I love fucking State of Euphoria. I also love that album cover too, and that's my favorite Anthrax album cover. So something about 1988, bands did these awesome comic book album covers and had straight up thrashy albums that had a lot of treble and that a lot of fans didn't think were so hot. So I don't know, maybe that's a 1988 thing. I think this is stronger than State of Euphoria. I think it's a great thrash album. That being said, I will admit, I do think it's their weakest album from the 80s. But that's not a bad thing, considering that I think all their albums from the 80s are awesome, including this one. This is an awesome album, but I do think all the other albums from the 80s are better. There are a handful of albums from the 90s I think are better, and I would say the last 5 albums are better. So I guess this is like a mid-tier Overkill album, but nothing wrong with a mid-tier Overkill album. I ain't kicking it out of bed, a mid-tier Overkill album. A mid-tier Overkill album is still better than 90% of other thrash and metal albums, in my opinion. Because Overkill is the greatest thrash band ever. And God, it starts off really strong with Shred. Damn, that's a just kick-ass song. I love the sound of it. I love how it just kicks in. This is where they really become Overkill. That's the thing. Even though I do think the prior 2 albums were stronger, this is where they really sound like Overkill. And it's where Bobby Blitz's vocals really become Bobby's vocals. Like, this is where he really gets that Udo Dirkschneider meets Bon Scott raspiness, kind of shrieky raspiness in his vocals that he didn't entirely have on the first 2 albums. But now this is where, this is where Bobby becomes Bobby. This is where Bobby Blitz really sounds like Bobby Blitz. So even though overall I think the other 2 albums were stronger, I think this is really the album where they became like Bobby Blitz's Overkill. And it's the best part of the album. Best part of the album are his vocals. They're amazing, and it's a very unique voice. And it's funny, it's the kind of voice that when I was a teenager was like, oh, I can't deal with this. But now I love it. Now he's like one of my favorite singers. So I don't know, something about becoming a scrappy middle-aged man made me just really appreciate these fucking over-the-top vocals. I love them. And I just love the whole attitude. Never Say Never. Great straight-up thrash song. I love it. And I really love the 3rd track, Hello from the Gutter. Now, this is a song that I know the band themselves thought they were going a little too pop. Like with this song, that they were going a little too mainstream. But, I respectfully disagree with Overkill. I just think this is just a really catchy, straight-up melodic metal song. It's not like hair metal by any means. It's not a power ballad. It's just straight up metal. It's just straight up metal. And they love Sabbath. They love Judas Priest. This is like a Judas Priest song. This is a straight up, catchy, heavy metal song. It's not thrash, but it's straight up, catchy metal. And I love it. And you know what? I wouldn't have mind if Overkill had occasionally thrown in more songs like this on their albums, actually. I think Hello from the Gutter is a classic. It's really fun. It gets the party going. I wouldn't mind if they had a few more like this. And Hello from the Gutter, it's awesome. And when they play it live, they play it even heavier. I love the whole sentiment, and it's very working class. It's very Jersey. It's an anthem. I love Hello from the Gutter. I think it's awesome. And I love the video with the fucking animated Charlie. It's fucking awesome. Mad Gone World. So heavy, back to the thrash. Most of this album is just straight up thrash. Brain Fade, awesome song, a little like Brain Shake, AC/DC, but like a thrashy version of it. Drunken Wisdom, that's a song I've heard some people say isn't that good. I love it. I love its sludginess and its groove. It brings in a little bit of that doom metal element that you will hear more and more throughout the 90s. I love it. End of the Line's great. Head First is great. And Overkill 3, in parentheses, Under the Influence, which makes it kind of a title track, I guess. I like it when songs aren't title tracks, but kind of title tracks. Obviously, they didn't call it Season of the Witch, which would have been cool because Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, is my second favorite Halloween movie, and it kicks ass. But Overkill 3, Under the Influence, great. I think stronger than Overkill 2, actually. Still not as great as the first Overkill. I still think that first Overkill song is the best of the Overkill songs. But this is pretty good. This is probably I would say my 3rd favorite of the Overkill songs. And it's an awesome track. I love that ending, that coda, that weird kind of progressive metal coda that comes in at the end. Very cool, very creepy. Love the atmosphere. Even if it's the weakest album from the 80s, like I said, I still think it's a classic. And I still love it. It's fucking rock and roll. Moving on to 1989, the last album to feature Bobby Gustafsson. Sadly, this is his last album, and the greatest album he was ever on, because here you go, here's the headline. The Years of Decay is my favorite Overkill album. Yeah, for a period there it was Horoscope, but now it's The Years of Decay. The Years of Decay, not only my favorite Overkill album, I would say right now it's my second favorite thrash album of all time. To me, you'll never top Ride the Lightning. I think Metallica's Ride the Lightning is the greatest thrash album ever recorded. But I think this is the second greatest thrash album ever recorded. Yeah, that's right. I put it above Master of Puppets. I put it above the first 4 Megadeth albums. And I love those albums. But this, The Years of Decay, man, it's just an amazing album. Amazing album. And the more I listen to this, the more I love it. The songwriting is on such a high level. I also think this is the best production. Yeah, this is the best production. They have a couple recent albums that I think are up there, but I think this is the best produced sounding Overkill album. Slicker, it's more powerful, but not at the expense of the edge of the band. It's a little heavier, it's a little darker than the last album. Love the album cover. It's awesome. Love all the songs. Just classic after classic. The band, their identity fully emerged with the last album, but here the songs are stronger. And the musicianship. And Bobby's vocals. Everything's just like the last album, but better. There's even more eclecticism in some ways. They might not have a song as melodic and slightly poppy like Hello from the Gutter, but they have a lot of different shades, which we'll get to, and you definitely see some of the doom influence emerging here. It starts off with a great opening, epic song, Time to Kill, so heavy, one of the great thrash openers in my opinion. And then Elimination, god damn it, one of the greatest Overkill songs ever. So catchy. It's like where punk and metal meet, just like Motorhead, you know? But here they're bringing in their scrappy gang vocals, and Bobby's Jersey Devil snarl is at full effect here. I love Elimination, one of their best songs. I Hate, awesome, just keeps going, really heavy, catchy song. Again, metal, punk, thrash, all rolled into one. Nothing to Die For, which is my second favorite song on the album. Yeah, I love it. I think it's a deep track, hidden gem that a lot of people don't talk about. Bobby G's guitar lines are awesome on it. I love what his guitar is doing throughout this song. Playing with Spiders / Skull Crusher. God damn, this is where they really get into the doom metal side. Yeah, so you got some doom metal, slow, very Sabbath-like. Bobby's vocals sound so menacing and awesome. I love Skull Crusher. One of the greatest Overkill songs ever. And it's definitely a top 5 favorite Overkill song for me. I love this song. It's awesome. Birth Attention, probably the weakest song on the album, but it's still great because every song on this album is great. So I would call it great killer filler thrash song. Who Tends the Fire? Awesome. Another song that I only usually hear people talk about Skull Crusher as being like doomy, but I think Who Tends the Fire is very doomy as well. It's almost just like a dark ballad. It gets a little heavier in certain parts and later on, but mainly it's just kind of a haunting, dark, doomy kind of dirge, kind of a dark ballad, and showing their different sides and showing that they're not just doing thrash. I love the atmosphere, and it feels like a creepy, like a kind of folk horror movie. I love it. The Years of Decay also kind of starts off like a ballad, becomes like this epic, dark ballad that leads into some heavier stuff at the end. Great title track. I love the atmosphere. That's one of the best songs on the album too. Classic song. And then you got Evil Never Dies. They put the E, N, and D, they capitalize it, so it's like end. Evil Never Dies. And people consider this Overkill 4, that this is the 4th Overkill song, and the fact that years later they would have an Overkill 5 points that I guess this is Overkill 4. So this is Overkill 4, and I love it. And if we are indeed counting this as the 4th Overkill song, this would be my second favorite one. I still don't think you could top that first Overkill song. That to me is the best one. But this is my second favorite of the Overkill Quinonopolis-ology or whatever you call that shit. Anyway, Evil Never Dies. Love it. Heavy, epic, different little parts. Gets a little soft in a few parts or in the chorus. And Bobby just sounds fucking possessed. He sounds possessed on this fucking song throughout this whole album. This is such a high level of skill and musicianship. As a teenager, I don't think I was ready for this kind of shit because it was just too good. It's just too awesome. I needed to be a man to appreciate this kind of music. That's right. This music for men. And if you were a teenager and you were into it, more power to you. That meant you were a man when you were a teenager. And here, have a sip of my beer. You earned it. You earned it. Drink it up. Drink it up, you fucking awesome bastard. Yeah. Did you backwash? And then Bobby G left the band, and we end this era of Overkill. Sadly, because it was very awesome. But maybe not so sadly, because maybe the next album is pretty awesome as well. And it begins this whole new awesome era. I'm going to take a break. I got to eat some dinner and shit. So what I'm thinking because this is getting kind of long, I think we've got to break this up. This was part 1. And then Overkill, every goddamn album review, part 2, the nightmare continues. And I'm going to really plow through those other albums. But the ones I really love, I will talk about quite a bit. So, here you go. That was part 1, Overkill, every goddamn album. If you like this video, like this video. Actually like it, click like. Just takes you a second. Helps me with the YouTube algorithm. And subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. So like, subscribe, and then you'll know when part 2 comes out. I'm Eddie Canistracci. I love Overkill. They're awesome. You should love them too. If you don't have all their albums, after you're done hearing part 1 and part 2, start ending all their goddamn albums. Alright, rock on.